see.
Okay, let's just...
Yesterday, Zach paid a visit to my studio where we literally ended up playing with my art. I think that's a lot about what Zach's about in art and life. In the midst of our conversation, I related a story to him when I learned what a quilt was. I was about 4 years old. My mom threw one down on the grass, set me upon it, and I was on all fours looking at it, and I couldn't believe it. And I said, "What is this?" She told me, "It's a quilt. Your great-grandmother sewed it with a bunch of women." I couldn't believe it. My mind was whirling. So many colors, texture, kind of ragged. I was hooked. So Zach kind of smiled after I said this and said, "Well, that's pretty much what my work is about these days." Okay, so last night we ate dinner with a couple of other Fibers people, and great conversation, lively, lots of fun. We talked about everything art related. What I've learned about Zach, Zach is an empath. Zach is a humanitarian. Zach is an archivist. And Zach may be a wizard.
All right.
So, you know, let's all get together, give a warm applause, and welcome Zach.
Welcome. Thank you for carving out a little slice of your, I assume, very busy days to be here, to think about textiles a little bit. I have found textiles so exquisite that I've devoted my life to them at this point. And so I hope if you're a textile person that you hear some things in the next little bit that make you nod. You're like, "Oh yeah, I've experienced that." I hope if you're not a textile person, which, newsflash, we all are because everyone here is wearing clothes. We got dressed this morning. We decided the one thing I could wrap my body in that would feel appropriate today is textiles. No one gets dressed in glass. Sorry, glass. Very few people wear paintings unless you're tattooed. There's something special about textiles that every single one of us here in this room can relate to. So thank you for bringing yourself, your experience, and your textiles with you on your body today to be part of this conversation. Let's start with, I don't know, there's so many things we could start with. Let's start with one. Raise your hand if we've met before, either in person or online. Maybe you follow me on Instagram. Raise your hand. Let's do the other way around. If this is the first time our paths are ever crossing. Okay, fresh audience. I'm going to tell all my stories. Starting with, I am celebrating 48 hours of being an ordained minister. Picture it. Durham, North Carolina. I've given a talk similar to this one. I'm exhausted. I go to the bar. I order my beer. I order my fish and chips. The beer comes, the fish doesn't, and I decide this is the moment, young Zachary, when you become an ordained minister. So I pull out my phone and I enter 3 pieces of information at the Church of Universal Life, and I'm now a legal minister. And here's why I wanted to do that. That is that I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. Never really felt like I fit in there for reasons that maybe are obvious now or will become obvious soon. But I thought, of all the things I've heard preachers talk about in the pulpit over the many, many years, the things I have to share are at least equally of value when it comes to the way we live our lives and move through the world. So, maybe this is a sermon, maybe it's just a talk. We'll find out together. There is going to be time for question and answers afterwards, so if I say something that's curious to you, well, just know we got time for it. Okay, let's start here. Maybe sit up a little bit straighter if that feels good to you, just for a moment. I want you to take your hands, raise them in the air, wiggle your fingers, activate those fingers. Oh, beautiful fingers. Lower them to your lap. Put your palms on top of your thighs. Chances are your palms, your fingers, are touching fabric. Ain't that funny? We all have that in common. Okay, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes right now. The fabric that you're touching at this moment, what temperature is it? Is it warmer than you expected? Is it cooler than you expected? Just take a moment with that. Now maybe rub your hands back and forth on your thighs. Feel the texture of that material. Is it smooth? Does it have a little tooth? Is it even or uneven? Maybe consider the fiber that this garment's made out of. Do you even know what fiber it's made out of? It's okay if you don't. If it's cotton, I'm wondering where that cotton was grown. If it's wool, I wonder if those sheep were happy sheep. If it's silk, do we even understand how a little caterpillar can make an article of clothing? If it's synthetic, what laboratory mixed together those chemicals? So many things to wonder about. I'm going to invite you now to take your fingers, find a seam somewhere on this garment, and just run your fingers up and down that seam. Bless you. That seam was sewn by another human being on this planet, just like you, just like me. This is not done by a robot. Robots can't do that quite yet. Wonder how many garments, just like the one you're wearing today, that human sewed on that shift. I wonder where your particular garment fell in the lineup of their day. Was it the first one they sewed that morning? Maybe they were feeling fresh. Was it the last one they sewed? Worn out and tired? Wonder how that person's doing today, right now, wherever they're at. More than likely, Bangladesh. Have you ever been to Bangladesh? I haven't. But almost all my clothes come from there. It's kind of funny. There is so much to wonder about when it comes to the clothes that are on our bodies right now. We don't have to dive too deep to experience that very normal mystery of textiles. I invite you now to open your eyes. Having bathed in the mystery of textiles, let's continue our conversation. Now, today, here's how we're going to structure our time. We start with you being our clothes. Check. We just did that. I'm going to then tell you 7 things textiles have shown me about how to live the good life, and then we're going to talk about ways to keep in touch. If you like what you hear over the next few minutes and you want more of it, we'll talk about that too. I'm going to call together some friends to help me tell these stories. Because I have a podcast I like a lot. There it is. Oh, wait, I can't jump over these stories. Hold on. Y'all getting me carried away. Okay, so I'm a quilt maker, which is shorthand for I make anything I can out of fabric. I just tell people quilt maker because it's a lot easier when you're at a party, right? I made my first quilt when I was this age. It was Laura Ingalls Wilder Day in the 3rd grade, and while that's kind of problematic when I look back on it 30 years later, I remember the one corner of the classroom where the teacher had a table set up with a pile of fabric scraps cut into little squares. I picked 4 squares. I could pick any color I wanted, she said. I sewed them together into a little 4-patch. Young 10-year-old Zachary was so excited about that 4-patch, the simplest of all quilt blocks, that he went home and made a whole pillow out of that 4-patch. Still in the attic somewhere. That's the first quilt I ever made. I didn't quilt again for nearly 10 years. But then I was in college. Made this quilt out of old bed sheets I found at the Goodwill. That's my partner's mamaw in East Tennessee. She was born and raised in a place called Boozy Creek. Learned how to sew from her mothers and sisters. She can pull a quilt from her closet, run her finger down a line of stitches, and tell you exactly which sister or her mother who had sewn that quilt. First time it ever occurred to me that quilting, sewing, stitches could be like signatures. Then the 3rd first quilt I ever made was this one. January 1st, 2012, wildly received. People were like, Zach, keep up with this, you're doing it. That's not how that happened. I will say though that somewhere between this quilt and this quilt, I had to stop because I had this mistaken notion that for a quilt to be successful, points had to line up. All my seams had to be just right, and they weren't, so I thought I was a failure. Until I just learned there's a different definition of success. I like to think I'm a quilter to the stars. I'm really not, but I did have this moment, which was a lot of fun, because I was a high school Spanish teacher of all things for 18 years, and the week that I left the classroom was the same week of this Met Gala when A$AP Rocky walked down the white carpet, in this case, wearing a quilt that I had helped to make. So that quilt you see on the outside is a vintage quilt stitched together in the 70s by Sarah, don't remember her last name's great-grandmother. They had given up this quilt at a thrift shop. The designer finds it, asked me to make the red background that you see when Rocky drops it. There it is in the studio. There's me feeling cute down there. About 9 months later, Rocky and Rihanna had a little baby, and I'm just saying maybe? I'm just saying maybe? Crazy things happen under quilts. I don't know if you've ever thought it out. Okay, 7 things textiles have taught me. This is where I'm going to bring in my friends. I have a podcast I like a lot. It's called SEAMSIDE. SEAMSIDE is a reference to the backside of a piece of patchwork. And if you're familiar with quilting, most quilts have 3 layers, right? You have your quilt top, you have your batting, and you have your backing. Once you've assembled all those layers, you never see the inside again, unless you're a quilter. So I like the idea that the seam side is a reference to the side of the patchwork that is evident for much of the time in the beginning of the process, but then is forever sealed off from our eyes after the final object is assembled. So here are 7 stories that I'm going to call 7 friends to help me tell about things that I love about textiles. 1, I'm going to call in Marley Grace. Raise your hand if you're familiar with Marley Grace. Oh, okay. Give it a minute, give it a minute. Okay, so Marley talks a lot about how capable, flexible, all-powerful textiles can be. All right, so here's Marley. We talk on SEAMSIDE. Here's one of Marley's quilts. Here's another one of Marley's quilts. Marley's also written some books, so if any of those look familiar or interesting to you, feel free to check them out. Now, when Marley and I were talking on SEAMSIDE, I mean, we had an hour-long conversation, but just to give you a taste of it, in this segment that I want to play, this clip, Marley is talking about the expansiveness of textiles, and Marley begins through the lens of realizing that they're gender non-binary, where they fit into this world, and how that opened up so much room for them in the creative process, and how textiles can do much of the same. Okay, so we'll listen to Marley share better about that, and then I'll share a little bit of my own story.
Once I started identifying as non-binary, like it was just kind of like everything got gay all of a sudden. When you're non-binary, I feel like you get to start accessing just the expansiveness that definitely comes into everything that I do. It's like the imagination is so childlike and so expansive that like it's just the opposite of black and white thinking. It's like everything can be anything, you know?
Everything can be anything. If that doesn't give you warm fuzzies, I don't know what will. I should probably just stop right now. Now, when I think, hold on a second, Mike.
Once I started.
Howdy. Okay, we're missing something. That's fine. Another thing I love about textiles is that they are containers of material energy, right? So not only are they infinitely flexible, the sweatshirt that I wore yesterday, like a normal sweatshirt, was this morning a scarf as I was walking around a little bit cold, right? Textiles can do so much. What I love about textiles, though, as an artist, is digging into their histories, the lives they've lived before they made their way to my stash in my hands. Textiles are beautiful containers for that. And so for this, I'm going to call in Emma Freeman, who, what you need to know before you listen to this clip is that she likes to bury stuff in the dirt. She makes these little prayer books that you see here. They're kind of mindfully stitched prayer books. Here is a contemplation cloth that Emma made, and there's a detail of the intricacy of the stitching that she's doing. Emma is in no hurry. Now, here's Emma on how she's experienced the material energy of textiles.
Powered them in dirt and made sure I marked a spot with a rock. That was important, so I would remember where they were. And then while they were down there, it was really wonderful. I found that I was like, my curiosity really opened. I wondered what was going on down there, what creatures were crawling across it. Where was rain seeping down through the pages, and it really felt also like this invitation to let go and like collaborate with the earth as a creator, so it wasn't just me creating this thing anymore. There was something about that I really loved. And then on the 30th day.
So she buries her books in the soil for 30 days and she digs them back up. If it's been a warm and wet 30 days, oftentimes she finds that her books are entirely consumed. She can't find them. Maybe she'll find like a button left over if there was a button. But if it's been colder and drier, sometimes it's just kind of half-eaten, right? She thinks a lot about coordinating, collaborating with nature and material and how that's vital to her process. When I think about it in my own practice, I have a lot of thoughts. This is a piece that was inspired by an artist from Seattle named Patty Shaw. Patty Shaw for years would walk down the street to her local Catholic church. The folks there would gather these little things for Patty. What these are you know a votive candle? You know the wick? The little piece of metal that holds the wick inside the candle? That's what those are. And Patty said something to me that I'm like, I know what you mean when you say that. She said, this is so important to me because this is all that physically remains of somebody's prayers. Somebody came to the church, they got the candle, they lit the candle, they made their supplication, they walked away from the church with the candle burning, and now this is the only thing that's left. She sees herself as a steward for those memories and that material energy. I do too. And so, hanging out with Patty, she gave me a whole bag of these, and I've been working them here and there into my own textile pieces as well. Now, I want to tell you about this story. I mean, this is about to get a little bit woo-woo. I hope that's okay with y'all. I'm going to kick off the sand. Okay, so these are 3 memory quilts. And Eric, I'm kind of thinking about you, not to call you out, Eric. Kind of thinking about you and the 2 quilts that you made with this one. So a fellow named Trey passed away. Trey lived down in Charleston, South Carolina, and his loved ones reached out to me to make a series of 3 memory quilts. I made this one first, I made that one second, I made that one last. You can tell that this is pretty rectilinear, right? Lots of squares, lots of rectangles, and then something happens down here that deviates from the path of the first 2. And as I generally do when I'm working with a client is I'll have a design wall where I can just kind of throw up pieces of fabric before I sew them down so that the client will have an idea of what I'm thinking. So I sent them a picture and I said, let me know what you think about this direction for the quilt, because I realize it's different from the first 2. It's okay if you don't like it. I said maybe the only reason I like it is because it's giving me like Virgo vibes. When I was a kid on the beach, I would collect the stained glass, I would collect the little fragments of seashells, and I would arrange them in the sand. Maybe I would group them by size, maybe I group them by color, different. So I said maybe I just like this because of my own history with similar shaped objects. So I texted them that picture, they texted me back real fast, and they said, Zach, that's the weirdest thing. They said Trey loved to walk on the beach, collecting sea glass. He would bring them home, and he would press them into concrete for outdoor sculpture. Where did that idea come from? I didn't know Trey, never known him. Didn't know anything about his life. But after having spent so much time, weeks, with his clothing, I just wonder what is transferred. That's the question. I have no answers. Because these quilts are all going to go to 3 different households, I made the backs kind of special. I'm pointing that out because I want to tell somebody about it. Okay, so look at the backs and I'll come back. Memory quilts are one of my favorite things to make because they hold material energy. This is one of my most recent memory quilts from my grandmother who passed away when she was 107. She lived in my childhood home, so I got to spend quite a bit of time with her in the last few years. This is one of her purple velvet, well, this is her purple velvet bathrobe. And, oh, there's so much I can tell you about it, but for the sake of time, I will just say that This particular memory quilt, reminds me of Grandma sitting at the kitchen table, drinking her coffee in the morning in this purple velvet bathrobe. She would always change out by mid-morning in case company came over. She's old school. I love that about her. Right? Not only is this capturing her life and her memories, but down in this panel, if you were in person and could read it, you would see that it tells the making of the story as well. Where I was at the time, my mom screamed in porch. What I was listening to at the time, chickadees in the morning, katydids at night. It felt important to keep the making of the story with the object. And there's other objects from other family members as well, tied in. Piece of lace she would have brought with her from Rio de Janeiro back in the 1920s. She was born in Rio. I do quilt talk, so if you want to hear more about these, Instagram, check it out. Textiles are both familiar and mysterious. This is the third thing I want to share with you. So similar to our understanding of deities, right? That deities we can get a little bit close to, but we can only get so close, right? Textiles, we surround ourselves with them, we live with them, but they remain in many ways unknown to us. And that's a really fantastic place for an artist to play around. So I'm going to call in here Judy Martin, a Canadian slow-stitch artist who lives on a little island in the middle of the lake. And Judy, like Emma Freeman, is in no hurry. Judy has all the time in the world. Look at some of these pieces she makes. So Judy's going to talk about her experience, about textiles, give her access to a rich interior life.
And I think also for us, the makers, when we work with the textiles, as we're handling them and as we're making them into shapes and towers or quilts, we are also working with our body, like our body is repetitively stitching, and that motion, it's just something rhythmic that sets us off, sets me off anyway, into this dream world, into this huge, immense, vast place that is the inside of me. And that's why I love making textiles, and I want to try and make that feeling in my textiles for other people to get just from looking at it. Because they know what they feel like. Everybody knows what cloth feels like. We touch it all the time. But to have that kind of poetic resonance is what it's called, with a song, just like you have when you look at the moon or when you look at the sunset. It just makes you go into your own self.
Judy's touching on the expansiveness of textiles. This thing that we drape around our bodies isn't just an external thing. Sure, maybe it lives there on the physical plane, but allows us to take a deeper dive into the interior. That's one of the reasons that I find this one particular subset of quilts I make so fascinating. I love making burial quilts. This is my burial quilt. The idea is that one day on down the road, hopefully it's far, far away, I don't know much about what's going to happen on that day when I'm no longer in my body. But I do hope, God willing, that my body will be wrapped up in this quilt when it's put to the ground. I was halfway through making this quilt. It was not going to be my burial quilt. In fact, I never even really thought about it that seriously at the time. I get halfway through and I'm like, Zach, this is the Zackiest quilt you've ever made. The colors, the movement. It is one of my earlier pieces, so the geometry of it is highly inspired by the quilters that she's been, if you're familiar with their great work. So I'm halfway through this quilt, and it was for a client. I was like, I can't part with this one. Have you ever been in a situation where you're making something for somebody else and you're like, oh, sorry, can't do it? You know? Okay, so you feel it. You feel it. I don't know what y'all did in that situation, but I turned around and made a whole set, which is not nearly as zacky, but they were happy. So this was a motif. It was a random motif. I didn't start out with this idea of like, oh, let me make a bunch of red sevens all over the place. But what came forth from that was this idea of, well, I call this quilt jackpot. Because I hope when I get to the end of my road that I can say, looking back on my life, that I feel like I hit the jackpot. I think it's safe to say I'm on that right track. We're going to find this. The next picture I want to show you of a burial quilt contains a real live human, not a dead one, a real live human on a very hot, sweltering day in Nashville, Tennessee. I am forever thankful to this friend who agreed to wrap up in a hot quilt on a summer day. But I wanted people to have this visual because you know what I'm talking about. When you see this thing in your mind, but you can't put enough words to it to help somebody understand it, we need to see it a lot of times. So my buddy here, helped me out with the photos. That textiles convey warmth and comfort. Point number 4. It's such a commonplace idea, but one that's so important. I like to say that I've never met a quilter I didn't like, which maybe not factually true, but definitely like generally true. I'm sure if I thought really hard, I could think of a quilter or two, and I just don't get around it. But I think there's something about working with textiles. If you are drawn to working with textiles, it says something about your orientation to this world, your orientation to community, your orientation to history, all of those things. I think it means that we're actually conveying comfort. Now, of course, the textile artists are the only ones that like to engage in comfort and work, but I don't think it's par for the course. Now, Lou Gardner passed away a couple months ago. God bless her. Beautiful soul, an embroidery artist from the UK. She made a lot of capes. She was a cape maker. And so she'd make these highly elaborate embroidered capes with the idea that they'd be worn by as many people as possible, right? So she'd make these capes. This one's called the Cape of Empowerment. And she would let anybody who wanted to try it on and have their picture made. And then she would talk to them about how they felt. I'm thinking, she was talking about how that cape made them feel. Did they feel that empowerment when they had the cape on? How do you carry that sense of empowerment with you even when you have to leave the cape behind? Those are the conversations that Lou loved to have so much. She made this silk scarf, which I love it. Love is a cosmic phenomenon. And she also made really fun furniture to put your feet on. Now Lou's going to talk about her inspiration for making these capes and what she hopes they accomplish in other people's lives.
And I just thought, oh my God, I'm going to make a cape. I'm going to make something that celebrates people. I want to wrap them up and celebrate them and protect them and nurture them and surround them in love. So I just went to this company and I just said, how about I make a superhero cape for women to celebrate them? And that's how it started.
Superhero cape for women. I'm here for it. We need more superhero capes, right? To get people to realize, to call forth those elements that are sometimes hard to call forth. This particular quilt called forth a lot. It brought a lot of warmth and comfort for the person who it was made for. Now, I'll tell you up front, the person that commissioned this quilt, her name was Claire, she didn't live to see it finished, right? So no, that's part of this story. She commissioned this quilt for her partner Teddy for his 40th birthday. And she went behind Teddy's back and she collaborated with all of his family members to mail me little pieces of fabric, articles of clothing, things like that. And so I made this quilt out of it. I sent this picture that you see here to Claire before she passed. She did see the finished top. She just didn't see it all finished quilt. When I finished the quilt, I texted Teddy, a person I'd never talked to before. I said, buddy, your quilt's ready whenever you want it. And I didn't hear back for over a year. It was just too soon. A year later, I reached back out. I said, hey buddy, if it's a good time, I would love to give you this quilt. And so he agreed. It was a good time. It was a good time. So he came over one night to my apartment building in Brooklyn, New York. We met in the lobby. It was dark. It was raining. Because of course it was dark and raining on a really hard night like this. And here we are in the lobby of my apartment building. And he walks through those double doors, and we embrace each other. I've never met this guy, but here we are bawling into each other's shoulders because of the connection of the person that had brought us together. One of the things that I did for this quilt, and I've never done again, I'm so glad I did it. This is how all the fabric came to me, by the way. They pinned cute little notes and stuff. Every piece of material to keep the story with the quilt, right? That's what I wanted to do by doing this. So on the back of Claire's quilt for Teddy, I made what I call a swatch library, for lack of better words. And here's a short video that shows you how it works. That's a dinner napkin from their wedding ceremony. And you can see it's like a legend, right, for all the swatches. So Teddy would know if he had any question. That seersucker shirt, that was your dad's. That little pin pocket from an apron, that was your grandfather when he was working at Piggly Wiggly. That pink floral, well, he knew that right away. That was Claire's nightgown, Perfect honesty. So in case there were any questions, Teddy had access to those stories in that history. Now another way that I think of textiles bringing warmth and comfort is this. So I love the folk schools. Anybody been to John C. Campbell Folk School in Western North Carolina? Put it on your list. If you're interested in traditional craft, they got all of them, right? That's why I learned blacksmithing, for example. Every year they have a fall festival. They've been doing that for 100 years, but of course during the pandemic, that wasn't able to happen. So they took 2 years off of the fall festival, and then when it came time to open back up, they invited me to make the quilt, because they made one every year. So we talked over some ideas. I came up with this good to be together concept, and then I vigorously hand tied it. You can see how many little ties there are in this quilt. Because what I was thinking about is the beauty of physical proximity to other humans. We're all in this room right now together. This is an amalgamation, a collection of people that in all of the future will more than likely never happen again. This is a singular moment right here. And that fall festival was going to be a singular moment. One of the things I found myself thinking about with all those ties is sociologists talk about something called loose ties, right? Those things where you go to the grocery store, that little chit-chat you have with the cashier, that's a loose tie. That neighbor you run into on the sidewalk, that's a loose tie. And when you think about happiness, some measures of happiness, sociologists have found that it's the best indicator for a person's happiness is the number and quality of their loose ties, not their significant ties, which feels a little counterintuitive. Right? You think we derive a lot of happiness from our most intimate, our loved ones, and we do. But the correlation is stronger for the number of loose ties. And that's what I found myself missing so much of in the early days of the pandemic, those chance encounters. And so these over 3,000 hand-tied knots are an ode to all the loose ties that we run into throughout our day. It's hung up now in what they call Keith House, that's their main building. What's on the back side? Let me type that. So this is a bed sheet that I laid over top of the quilt and just traced in a permanent marker. So it is a real life-size line drawing of the quilt front. The quilt was displayed prominently in the festival barn, but the white sheet was taken down and laid onto a big table so that as people were coming into the festival barn, they were able to sign their name. Celebrating and cementing and recording and documenting their physical presence and their physical proximity in this event. We now have an attendance list for Fall Festival 2022, and that's a beautiful one. And the two button together, so they'll stay together, hopefully, forever. All right, I think we're on number 5, maybe number 6. Textiles show us how to live, no doubt about it. Christy Johnson, good friend of mine from upstate New York, another embroiderer. She thinks a lot about the power of symbols, and the symbols that we choose to put onto our bodies and onto our beloved objects to remind us of certain powers or certain qualities. She's even written a book about it, Mystical Stitches, what do you know? That is a treasure trove of symbols from many different cultures, many different time periods, and various associations that those symbols might have. So here's Christy talking about how textiles have softened her up in her daily life, how they've shown her how to live a little more softly in this world.
I find that the more I sort of go with the flow, the less conflict there is, and I think that's very much the same with working with textiles, where I can try and force this velvet to do this certain thing, but that velvet does not want to work like that. And so kind of going with like, okay, what does the velvet naturally want to do? It kind of wants to slip all over the place. So either I need to do a little bit less with it, or I just need to be really patient and calm and do it one stitch at a time.
I think I kind of want to make a quilty banner that says, what does the velvet want to do?
Yeah.
Right? Because no matter what your medium, textiles or not, doesn't matter, we are deeply entrenched and entwined in this conversation with our material. And we can try to force it to do what our human brain wants it to do. But I find it's more interesting, and I find the pieces come out more successful if it's more of a collaboration. When you think about what does that velvet actually want to do. lesson for living in there somewhere. Now here's a piece that if you were in our little stitching group this morning, you saw this in real life. It's my favorite t-shirt, and I hated to sew it down. I hated to pull it out of commission, or pull it out of rotation, I should say, and stitch it down. But I had to, and here's why. So during the pandemic, 3 of my friends, this is Luke Haynes from LA, this is Heidi Parks from Milwaukee, that's Amanda Nading from Chicago. The first 3 of us, we had a monthly talk show on YouTube called Soft Bulk, celebrating the qualities of quilts that don't often get talked about. People love to talk about quilt tops, right? But we don't talk about the soft bulkiness of quilts, how they can be soft sculptures in and of themselves, right? So these talks are dedicated to that. And in one of the sessions that we had, I presented a current body of work that I was working on called Sex Quilts. And I hope that in our brief half hour together, that you get the sense that I'm not here to be lewd or vulgar or overshare even, right? I just talk about the stuff that I experience in life. We do many of the same things, right, in our work, talking about things that we work with. Anyway, so I talked about sex quilts. And as soon as that call was over, I get an email from an artist who before this encounter I really respected. I really loved her work. She still makes beautiful work. The email started with, Zach, I love you, bud. If you ever hear those words come out of your mouth, just stop, please just stop. Like, nothing good can come after that bud, right? She says, Zach, I love you, bud. Can you not be a little less intimate? Which is a really weird question, isn't it? Like the syntax is just so like mangled around itself. It took me a second to really think, what? Can I not be a little less intimate? It felt like this person was asking me to go back in the closet. It felt like this person was asking me to put my little light under the bushel, right? In short, it all just felt very gross. I didn't like any of it. And so this is why I'm thankful that I have a creative practice that helps me process funky feelings, right? That can act like a crucible when I don't know what else to do or I don't know the words to put the things, right? So if you can see this quilt in real life, you can see that it was made in 48 hours, November 19th and 20th. Because I just sat and sewed. I took the shirt that I was wearing the day that I presented about the sex quilts. That's why I had to use it. The same shirt that she saw me talking, and I wanted her to see it again. I cut out her words from fabric, stuffed them between the 2 layers of the t-shirt, because the t-shirt was so well loved, it was basically sheer. It was transparent, and so that was the quality I wanted to tap into with this work. And by the time 48 hours had passed, and I tied the last knot, the last little stitch in this quilt, all the funkiness had been burnt off. Right? This is why I don't know what people do who aren't artists and makers. How do they process the stuff that happens to all of us? I don't know, but I'm thankful that we have that practice. Now, I did not respond to her email. I wrote it, I just didn't send it. She had to wait a whole month for my response, and it was this quilt. Here's a couple details. Yeah, we won't go there. I'll tell you part 2 another time. All right. Wrapping up, 6 out of 7. Textiles meet us where we're at. There's no Christian hymn that says, come just as you are, right? Which is a beautiful idea. Whether it always maps out to reality or not, I don't know. But it is a beautiful idea, right? Come just as you are. Textiles meet us where we are. That's part and due to their flexibility, but also just the wide variety of the textile practice. Rachel McGinnis is a good friend from Penland, lives in Spruce Pine. She is a weaver who also loves quilts. And so one of her bodies of work is taking vintage quilts, old quilts, cutting them up in little tiny strips. She cut one, she lays it on the floor just so. She cuts the second strip, she lays it on the floor just so. So nothing gets out of order. She weaves that quilt back together on the loom, compressing the entire quilt, compressing it right here. So you see something that's basically like the size of an area rug, right? It's amazing. It's amazing what she does. Here's another piece that she wove on the digital loom. And this piece is something special. So Rachel unpicked by hand an entire quilt. took out every single quilting stitch, separated the quilt top from the batting, separated the backing from the batting. She took the batting and gold leafed the whole thing. And you can still see the original quilt lines of that maker sewed into the quilt, even though it's no longer a quilt. The traces remain. Now Rachel had a really interesting thing to say about how weaving meets her where she's at, so let's give her a listen.
So you were painting, 2019 comes, you hit that crux point and you're like, no more painting, let me weave. What was it, do you feel now that you have a few years perspective to look back on? What was it that weaving offered you in that moment that painting wasn't? Or what opened up for you with weaving that painting wasn't?
So I think my first, just a simple answer, it was a grounding. Weaving is a grounding for me. It's a place I feel so comfortable. Not just at the loom, but the process of weaving is something that, it's how my brain works. It's how it functions. And so it just felt like home to me.
What does that mean? It's how your brain works?
It has a logic to it. So you can plan, right? You can have intention, you can plan. But I've always, the way I weave is I put on a lot of work. And I don't necessarily know what will result from that. So when I learned to weave, I always thought I wanted to be a production weaver. I thought that I really liked knowing what something will be. And I quickly found that I lose interest very fast if I know what a piece will look like. And so I think it feels like home, like ground to me, because it's a place to start. And there's a logic to it, but I can do anything once I'm there.
So Rachel feels at home at the loom. I feel at home sitting and sewing two little patches in my hands. You feel at home, I imagine, working with your chosen practice. There's this naturalness that doesn't carry over into every facet of our lives. I can think of many spaces and many situations where I don't feel at home, which makes me so thankful for my sewing practice. Here's a great example for you. So I made this quilt back in Maine at Airmont. Anybody been to Airmont in Gatlinburg, Tennessee? Oh, it's a treat. I had come to Airmont with this idea of making this grand mobile, over 2,000 suspended pieces of quilt. It was going to be grand. And I get to Gatlinburg, and it just was not the time or the place. I'm walking down the streets of Gatlinburg, and it's just feeling so, everyone is feeling cut of the same cloth, to use a textile metaphor. And that cloth wasn't the cloth that I considered myself out. And so I just felt very weirded out the whole time I was there. And so I decided, I can't make this mold. My mind wasn't there anymore. So I went to the scrap bins at the Airmont Textile Studio, and I just started grabbing the colors that were resonating, which were not the colors I normally use. Right? These are kind of, I don't know, there's something a little dusty about them. You know? And I just start stitching. I'm sewing them down. I make 12 or 13 so these little blocks and stitch them together. Here's another for you. More details. And what I didn't realize at the time, and I should really have a picture to show you, I didn't realize at the time, it took me getting back home to New York, pulling this quilt out, getting back to my bedroom, and I realized that I had used the exact same, I'm getting choked up here. I had used the exact same color palette that Mamaw had made in the quilt that we have on our bed, right? So in this moment where I'm feeling a degree of distress and not fitting in and not feeling at home, I made my own comfort object. And it was a gift that was given to me via Mamaw, right? And all of that was subconscious, under the surface, just happened. And that'd be where I was at. Here's another one, just a quick one because this one's fun. I was in Mexico walking around and just enjoying myself, and I started noticing all these highly colored plastic spoons laying all over the ground. These are little ice cream spoons, right? And the more I saw, the madder I found myself getting, more and more irritating. I got so frustrated with an industrial system that values brightly colored toy-like objects that we're going to use for 5 minutes, but are going to be on the planet for at least 5 centuries. So I started collecting those, not knowing what I was going to do with them. Ended up, oh, you should know that at the same time I'm collecting spoons, I'm also making a travel quilt. Meaning I brought no fabric with me to Mexico, I was only using material that I found along the way. Right? So I'm making this travel quilt. I'm collecting these spoons. I'm like, here's an idea for you, Zachary. I started stitching down all the spoons on top of the quilt that I was making, thus obscuring the project I'd come to make. There's a lesson there somewhere for us. This is the only acoustic piece I've made to date. I call this, I had my friend Isabel hold this up and we did what we call the spoon quilt shimmy. So hold on, let me turn this up. Ain't that a beautiful sound? Thank you, spoon. All right, last up, and then we'll do a little Q&A. Textiles help us connect to our ancestral roots. This is something I think a lot about. This is where my current body of work is, so I'll be sharing several very recent pieces with you. But I want to call in first my good friend Beverly Smith, down from Charlotte, North Carolina. Beverly, here's some of her pieces. This one, if I remember correctly, is called The Darker the Berry. Here's one of her sister, Evangeline. Here's Beverly standing with another quilt that features her sister, Evangeline. And Beverly's working on a collection of work right now called Last Seen Wearing, right? Referencing posters you might see for people who've gone missing, right? And she's thinking a lot about her ancestors. And well, I'll let her tell you the story. But that's where she's coming from, right? You're going to hear her in this blip talk about Evangeline. Just remember that's her sister that she lost long ago as a child.
I never knew of. And they're starting to take place on this canvas that I'm drawing, I never knew of.
Something wrong with that sound. Can you fix that for us? Because I want you to catch everything Beverly has to say. Okay, here we go. Thank you for your patience.
And I start finding these evangelists going all the way back that I never knew of. And they're starting to take place on this canvas that I'm drawing like I'm getting ready for the series. And sometimes I feel that I just can't get away from this subject matter, but during the emancipation, during the 1860-63, when the first slaves were free, they started looking for their relatives. Now, when I was coming up and I was learning that history, and I would see images, it was just like we were just meandering, didn't know what to do. Now that the master has set us free, what do we do? But in actuality, the enslaved, the free slaves now, they're looking for their ancestors all over the place. They are documenting letters placed in newspapers, locally as well as nationally, looking for their people. And I feel like this is what's beckoning me. It won't let me go. It still has me searching for these ancestors. Some of them I never known. My family is never mentioned. And going back as far as the early 1700s, they're manifesting themselves through my drawings. And this is kind of where my artwork is.
One of the first stories Beverly told me, we were talking on the phone one night, I was stretched out on the couch, and we were just sewing and chatting. And she said, Zach, I gotta tell you about my studio. I said, I'd love to hear it. Her studio's in an old church down in Charlotte, in the Brooklyn neighborhood, if you're familiar. And she's lucky enough to have one of the sanctuary studios, so you can imagine high ceilings, nice light, that kind of thing. And she's been working there for years, making her quilts, making her pieces. And then she found out that in this very sanctuary, her late uncle used to be the preacher there. And in fact, it was that late uncle that she had heard about growing up who had a heart attack in the middle of a sermon, died right on the spot. And now she was working in that space, totally unbeknownst to her. How's that happen? I don't know. It's amazing though, isn't it? Now.
And I start finding.
All right, Beverly, thank you.
And I.
I'll just turn it down. All right. Now, I will say that all of these talks, if you want to hear more, because you're just getting a little highlight reel, there's full episodes. And the episodes are like an hour long, so there's lots of details there that go through. So, the collection I'm working on now, I'm calling Southern White Amnesia. And I'm exploring the kinds of stories that Southern white families tell about their own origins here in the U.S., and maybe more important, the ones they don't tell about their own origins. So much has been lost in just 3 generations. For me, it's just 3 generations away from emancipation and slavery days. And there's so many things I don't know about my own family history. But about 5 years ago, as the family historian for my family, I started running across the first records that some of my ancestors had enslaved people. I've never heard anything about this before. So I go to one of my family members and I say, is this true? Have we enslaved people? And real fast she said, nope. Pause. Thinking. I think we would know, she said. And that was a light bulb moment for me because it made me wonder how many other Southern white folks are walking around with the assumption that they would know if this is where their inherited wealth would come from, if this is where their inherited privilege would come from. And so I'm feeling like Beverly says, you know, her work won't let her go, it's got her, right? This won't let me go. Like, I can't sit with these stories and be the only one that know them. And so I'm sharing them in textile. So in this particular quilt, it's essentially an infographic, right? You're seeing here an alternate way of showing family relations. You know, everyone's familiar with the tree. The problem with the tree is that it branches out way too fast. It gets very untenable to represent in a concise graphic form. Enter the family, right? And so here I am down here in this corner. Here's my parents, grandparents, etc. What you see here are 5 generations. This green ribbon represents emancipation. It says slave owners forced to emancipate. And if I'm not here telling you the story, here's a little clue that these pink rings correspond to the folks that did the enslaving in my family. When you overlay who was involved in slavery and who had access to higher education over the subsequent generations, the trends in my family are very, very clear. These blue patches are folks that had access to higher education. So you'll notice that this is my mom's side, goes back generations and generations. They've been going to college and university, higher education for a long time. My dad was first generation. He comes from a long line of subsistence farmers. Where we come from matters. We like to think of ourselves as these like floating atoms, these individualized atoms just kind of bumping into each other from time to time. That's baloney. You, I, we are our grandparents, are our great-grandparents. We are them. Their DNA is in us. We're just living it out in this plane this time right now. If you look at the top right corner, top right corner, you'll see an actual silver dollar stitched down. There's that Eisenhower. That's his ear right there sticking out. And then it says, the text said, I got this silver dollar from my granddad. Which is true. That happened. It's also just a common way to acknowledge intergenerational love. This is a floor quilt. I didn't even know there was such a thing until I named it a floor quilt. It's meant to exist on the floor because when it's horizontal, it just lays out just right. It also makes sense because this is a landscape. This is a quilted landscape, a 3-dimensional quilted landscape. It's got at least half a dozen layers of polyfill right there in the middle. What this is a representation of a family burial ground down in Lawrence, South Carolina, which is where a lot of the family I just showed you was from. And I went back there a couple years ago. One of the local folks led me back in the woods to this burial ground. It's now, of course, trees are growing up in the middle of everything. We got back to a certain part of the woods and we see this stone wall, about knee high. You go inside that stone wall, you see some real nice little ornately carved tombstones. They got doves, they've got angels, they got all the Bible verses anybody could want. Elaborate carvings for my ancestors. But if you turn around and you look to the side, you see here in this space, in the leaf litter, indentations, about 6 feet long, about 2 feet high. At the one end of those indentations, it's just a rough rock, all about the size of a cantaloupe. Just sitting there. And I asked the person who took me back about it, she says, oh, we assume those are the graves of the enslaved. Oh, okay. That seemed kind of messed up. What seemed even more messed up was when you walk outside of this cemetery, there were other indentions just out in the woods nearby. So there's this conversation about gatekeeping happening here. Who gets to decide who's buried inside the family plot and who gets buried outside the family plot? I mean, we know the answer to that question. It's history, right? We see it. But I thought a lot about this burial ground lives in my mind quite a bit because I think what did you gain? Right? What did you gain, ancestors, by exploiting the labor of other people? One thing I did as a way of holding memorial space for the folks that were buried in these sunken graves was I knew through my research that this generation, my 5th great grandfather, Solomon Langston, there were records that he enslaved 5 different Africans. And we knew that the names that they had were David, Edie, Spencer, Adam, Leah, and Jane. So I made them a placeholder tombstone. I sewed some shell beads as offerings inside their indentation. And this piece is called Like Family. Because you probably heard it. I've heard it in my family. Oh, my grandma had a black maid growing up, but she was like family. I said, Grandma, you pay her? Yeah. But she wasn't family. She wasn't showing up just for the love of the family. I mean, maybe she was. I don't speak for her, but I'm assuming it was a job. Now, this is a piece. What do I want to tell you about? This piece is written in Boustrophita, which is an old, ancient way of writing. You know, we're used to, here in the West, starting all of the lines of our text on the left-hand side of the page each time. Boustrophita is Greek for as the ox plows. We can imagine that an ox, if we were oxes, would plow a row and then get to the end of the field, turn around and plow again, turn around, plow again, right, going back and forth. So this was a bona fide way of writing a couple thousand years ago in many different cultures. And the effect is kind of serpentine, right? Kind of like a cobra, just waving back and forth, like kind of lull you into a certain state. And so this is a snippet of an allegory that I wrote explaining how the snake of whiteness permeates each generation anew. And so if you can read it, you can kind of read this one. Our children, our here referring to white children. Our children are born with a snake in the crib. This guardian serpent whispers silver-tongued seeds into the open ears of our children that bloom later in life. Whispers like, of course, all these whispers are lies. Right? Whispers like, all this belongs to you. Whispers like, you have all this because you work so hard. Whispers like, they don't work hard like you. Again, all those whispers are lies. But it's whispers that as white folks, me as a white person, has heard so much in so many different situations, in so many different contexts. And so I want to put those whispers into words so we can begin to actually look at them head on and assess them for what they really are. I'll show you, this is made out of an East Indian scarf that I found in a thrift shop. It's velour on one side and silk on the other. And I open it up, and it turned out to be unexpectedly beautiful. Let me just show you this quick video. Oh.
Y'all, I walked in the studio this morning, could not believe what I saw. This piece that I've been working on all the time is actually double-sided. I love how those mirrors on the front became polka dots. And that word joy, it's like it's actually you. And move back to the front, but opposite front. It's so subtle and soft and luxe, especially as we zoom in. Take a look at that velour and the micro piece. This is beautiful. I have no idea anything was going on back there. I'll tell you what, one of those beautiful surprises when you're working with these like this.
And what I love about this, and you probably have experienced this too in your own practice, whatever it is, I love watching people interact with the objects that I made, right? And almost to a person, when they walk in the studio and this was up, the texture is so luxe and so lush. Everyone just went up and grabbed it, or held it, or touched it. They wanted to engage, and I was like, good. Once you get comfortable, let's talk about this first. Snake Handler Part 2 of the same series. I had a dream once where an ancestor came to me and said, oh, he just gave me a writhing, angry, poisonous snake. I said, great-granddad Hiram Dugan was his name. I said, Hiram, I don't want this snake. And we passed it back and forth, back and forth. But at the end of the dream, when I woke up that morning, I was left with the snake. And I was left with the understanding that it is the work of us, the living, to do what we can to untangle the problems of the past. So that's my charge. That's what I'm doing. Thank you, thank you. I had a quilt raised in Finland. Y'all know the song Snake Farm? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
100%.
Yeah. If you're humming it the rest of the day, my apologies. Yeah, it's done in the style of Southern Baptist Church banners. I spend a lot of time sitting in church, not listening to sermon, but looking at the pretty fabric things hanging on the walls around it. Okay, wrapping up, part 3, keep in touch. Where do we go from here? This is Zachary circa 2012, 2013, 10 years ago in other words. And I look at this young person on the screen, and I think, dang, you have done a lot of growing in the last decade. Part of that is leaving my 18-year career teaching. I was a square peg in a round hole, or a round peg in a square hole, whatever it is. I was just a misfit, so I wasn't using my energy appropriately. That was part of it. Part of it's getting the medication straightened out. That was part of it. And part of it is textile. A large part of it is textile. Textiles has proven to be, for me, so rich in metaphor and connection that I don't think I can exhaust in my lifetime. I'm gonna try. We'll see if I can wear it out. I doubt it though. It's helped me move from being that little Virgo child that was all about order and precision, you know, sorting the shells on the sand of the beach, to more my moon sign, the Aquarius child, who wants to flip the world upside down and make it a better place for everybody. It's helped me find my voice. It's given me a way of speaking that I don't think I could do any other way, to be honest with you. I think of my quilts as objects that they need me as the human mouthpiece, and I need them as the foundation, the visual foundation. So it is this relationship back and forth. I don't know what I would do without them, to be honest with you. At this point, we're too intertwined. Sorry, textiles, you're stuck with me. Now, if you liked the stories that you heard today, I have a very cute zine I would like to offer you. You're welcome to scan it. 12 Ways Quilting Will Change Your Life. So feel free to take your phone out and snap at it if you would like. It will also put you, just FYI, it'll put you on my email list so we can keep in touch that way. You can unsubscribe anytime. No hard feelings. But if you want to follow along, that's a great way. Instagram is also a great way. I'm ZakFoster.quilts. Just remember, Zak is Z-A-K. Don't know why, ask my mama. Z-A-K. Foster.quilts. And with that, folks, I will take a bow. I will receive your little bit of applause, and I'll take your questions. How about that? Seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your I know you got a million things going on. You got a million things in your brain, but you were here and you were present, so thank you for that. Q&A. Anything I left unresolved for you? Yes, in the back corner.
So I have a question. You talked about how you let go of certain clumsy emotions when you create your work, especially with the work the scripture of what was told to you. I wanted to ask both of you too about work afterwards. Do you let it go or just keep it?
I keep most of my work at this point. I keep most of my work. That one I shared on the next episode of Softball. So the person that wrote me that email got my response through the quote, but I kept the quote.
Yeah, you don't return back to those feels steps, like you let it go completely.
Yeah. The energy is burnt off at that point. That I found. Yeah, thank you.
I was wondering, I could watch videos, but I'm just curious because I've heard you talk about sewing on a machine, and I've seen things. Do you hand stitch mostly now? Okay.
Almost all my work is hand stitched at this point. I just find it to be much more flexible than a machine, much more enjoyable, much more transportable. Yeah, that's me. That's my practice. Yeah.
When you're quilting, what do you do to occupy your brain?
When I'm quilting, what do I do to occupy my brain?
Yeah.
Okay, this will probably come as no surprise, but I sit there sewing and thinking about what stories am I going to tell about this quilt. And so I find myself often rehearsing stories, like how do I word this, right? Like I'm really actively thinking about presentation during that time. I would say that's 50% of it. The other 50% is just whatever happens to be occupying the bandwidth.
I just know it takes a long time, so I was wondering.
It takes human time. I need that time to put my stories together, to understand what the fabric is helping me see. Yeah.
So that generational quilt about the emancipation proclamation, was it intentional that there's no grandmother's fan block there?
So the question is, in the piece that's about the silver dollar, intergenerational inheritance, was it intentional that the motif looks like a fan?
Well, there's a quilt block called Grandmother's Fan.
Yeah.
And I was is that specifically, or just kind of all came together that way?
It all just came together that way. Yeah, that fan pattern is an established kind of genealogical way of organizing data. So I borrowed that. Yeah. But I like that connection. Yeah.
Can you talk about how you what steps you take into
Well, here's the interesting thing. Okay, so Ancestry.com is revolutionary, right? Like, at this point in time, we can know so much more about our origins than we've been able to in many, many centuries, right? Time was, we told oral stories about where we came from, and we passed those down generation by generation. Those got lost, but now we have Ancestry, which is helpful. I would also say that as a white person, there's an abundance of documentation about my ancestors' existence on this world, right? Because whiteness often came with money, often came with land deeds and marriage records and slave censuses, all kinds of things, right? So I think of it like this, that it is 100% a privilege to be able to learn this kind of information about my own family history. Because it is so easy for me as a white person, it is also, in my view, my obligation and responsibility to understand where I come from so that I can turnkey it, flip this world upside down a little bit, and make it a better place for everybody. That's how I see it. That's my lens. Did I answer your question? Yeah, Deborah.
So, can you talk a little bit about your process and maybe the time that it takes from when you have an initial idea, kind of letting that happen, and then reflecting that in your work, and then the action that you work.
So my buddy Luke Haynes likes to say there's two ways to make a piece of art. Maybe we can think of more than that together. But he says 2 ways to make a piece of art. You can start with the idea and then go around sourcing the materials. Or you can start with the materials and then listen for the idea. 9 times out of 10, I do it this way. I start with the material. I go to a thrift shop, I'm sourcing things that way. I'm looking to see what happens with those pieces, those elements. And the story comes out of that. 1 time out of 10, I start with the idea. The snake handler church banner quilt, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to make. I went to the thrift shop with the commitment that I was going to buy all the material to make that in that one stop on that one trip. So that was kind of a fun set of parameters. But generally, I'm starting with material and working backwards to the idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so inspired by how you're connecting your Southern Baptist upbringing to your work. Can you talk about how you navigate discerning what you want to incorporate into your work and like keep from that, and what doesn't suit you any longer and you want to leave?
I think as a Southerner living in the South, religion is unavoidable. Even if you may not have grown up going to church, you probably grew up in a community where everyone around you went to church, right? Like it is just part of the fabric of the South. And so for me, and this is more a recent thing, this is a new thing, so I'm processing this right now, but I really am attracted to the idea of using the framework and the structures of church and religious language, religious symbolism and iconography in a new way that's more inclusive and more open. I'm not interested in, I think there's ways that one could think about working with how one's ancestors were involved with slavery in a way that might convey a sense of like guilt and sense of like, finger wagging. I'm not interested in any of that. I don't think that gets us very far at all together. What I do think can get us somewhere is tapping into these areas of common foundation. And for me, living in where I grew up is the Southern Baptist Church a lot of times. Tapping into that and then poking around the edges and wondering how can we make those more expansive and more inclusive. That's my first thing. I'll keep thinking about that. Thank you.
Is there anything you like are, I mean, maybe you don't want to share because maybe it's still in the work, like where would you like to like take your practice? Do you have any ideas like where you'd like to take it?
Well,
like any big ideas or small ideas?
Yeah, I got some dreams. I'm just gonna let them marinate in the back though. But I will say my dreams for this collection is I'd love to have a traveling show. Maybe, just thinking this for the first time, maybe it's a big tent revival. That would be a lot of fun. Maybe a Lexi, maybe our conversation just sparked that idea. But I'm interested in getting my work into spaces where people like my family can see it. So that's probably not the gallery, the white wall, huge. It's probably public libraries, strip malls, parks, those kind of places.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's another question? Yeah, Justin.
I'm wondering sort of what the response was to like any has been pushback from it, like people at the South here things like an approach to using social media, like is there from the conversation?
Well, between us here in this room, I will say that ever since I have started working on Southern White Amnesia, and for what it's worth, I mean, this is just a metric. I'm offering what I'm about to tell you just as a metric. My Instagram following has leveled off in the last year. Zero growth. I've been at 51.3, 51.4, whatever it is, for about a year solid. Some people really respond well to the work, and that's great. That's who I want to talk to. Some people feel in their way about it. They don't want to follow along with it. Many blessings. The door's that way. That's one. Now I'm interested, one of the big projects I can talk about, one thing I would like to do in the future is continue sharing everything I've learned about my own history with my extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. And then ask them to contribute an article of clothing from their own homes, from their own closets, as a way of almost like a red receipt, right? Like I have shared with you everything I know about how our family got wealth. So now give me a piece of clothing saying that you acknowledge that you know this now. Now it's a win-win situation, right? Because even if they don't contribute, they're like, oh, forget that. Once you hear a story, you can't unhear it. Once they read what I have to share, once they hear what I have to share with them, they can't unhear it. That knowledge is now deep inside of them. And we'll see what happens. Plant those seeds. Plant those seeds. And so I think a lot about Brian Stevenson, who started he organized this memorial for victims of lynching throughout the United States. And for every county in the United States where a black person was lynched, there is now, in this pavilion, hanging from the ceiling, these 6 feet tall concrete columns. One for every county. Right? Each of those columns, if you're not familiar, has a sister column, a sibling column, over in another pavilion. Those counties are welcome to adopt their column and take it back home, under the condition that they display it prominently in a public space. And this is where Brian Stevenson is just so genius, because he can't lose in this situation. Either the column remains, and everyone knows, oh, that county's not ready for it yet. They're not holding up their history. Or they take it, in which case the message gets to go back home. It's win-win. So those are the kinds of dynamics I'm trying to think about here. How do we engage in these ideas and make it win-win in as much as that is possible? Thank you for that question.
I don't think we want you to stop, but I think we probably have to, yeah.
Y'all gotta go. Y'all been so nice. Thank you so much. I'll be around if you want to come chat. Otherwise, many blessings. Have a wonderful day. Yeah, please.